Hello, everybody. I'm Milton Davis, and welcome to 11 Questions Special Edition. Tonight, we have one of my favorite authors, Nicole Given Kurtz. Hey, Nicole, how you doing?
Hey Milton, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm glad you were able to make some time to come with us. Like I
Mhm.
said, the good thing about doing these interviews is that I get to talk to people who I'm fans of and who people I admire their work, and you are definitely one of those people. So
Thank
I'm
you.
going to start off by reading your biography, and then we'll get into the questions. Okay, Nicole Given Kurtz is an author, editor, and educator. She's the recipient of the Ladies of Horror Grant in 2021, the Horror Writers Association Diversity Grant 2020, and the Atomicon Palmetto Scribe Award Best Short Story 2021. She's been named as one of the Book Riot's 6 best Black indie science fiction and fantasy writers. Nicole has over 40 short stories published, as well as numerous novels and 3 active speculative mystery series. She hails from the South, where Gothic and strange are part of the culture. You can support her work via her Patreon. So that is Nicole in a nutshell. It doesn't even scratch the surface of who she is and what she's done. So we're going to talk about a little bit of that day, and we're going to talk about some of her projects. So the first thing I like to ask you, Nicole, is why speculative fiction?
Oh my goodness. So when I was young, my father and I would spend time watching Star Trek. So like most blurs, my love of fandom came from watching Star Trek. But even earlier than that, my favorite kid book was Where the Wild Things Are. And so Max in his, his suit, he gets sent to bed because he doesn't want to eat, and he travels to a faraway land where he becomes king of all the wild things. And so I was a very stubborn child, and I got sent to my room often. And so I was the only child for like 6 years, and so a lot of my playtime was alone. And so I began to have these really fantastic journeys, just like Max, right? And Where the Wild Things Are. And so my love affair with speculative fiction in terms of fantasy, science fiction, and eventually horror, because in my teens I just ate everything that was Stephen King, um, began really early.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was reading when he says something about growing up in the South and where Gothic is a way of life, and I'm like, man, I grew up in the South, and y'all got to show me where this stuff is, because
Oh my gosh, your mom telling you about Little Rabbit Foo Foo, and just like my grandmother is was a pastor, and they believed in spirits and the Holy Ghost. And I grew up in a holiness church where people spoke in tongues. And
oh yeah,
I mean, it was very much a part of who I am, and also part of being Southern, right? I mean, we didn't do the snake handling bit, but we did speak in, my grandmother spoke in tongues, and so did my aunts, and so does my mom. And that's just a part of like that culture.
and do you see yourself writing a lot from? Do you see a lot of that influence your writing? Because I know for me personally, I deliberately kind of kept that out of my writing until later on. I just kind of find it floating in there. But what about you? Is this something that has influenced what you do and how you write?
Some of it does. My story that just appeared in Apex, Dogwood Stories, is actually about the dogwood tree, and the legend around it that, it's the tree of Christ. It has the 4 spots of blood, like the cross, and where they actually, because there's a dogwood festival in Knoxville, and it's a
Yeah,
super huge thing. And
yeah,
so, so only recently have I started pulling from my childhood and my growing up in East Tennessee and being that Southern, but my metaphorical home is New Mexico, right? So even though I grew up in Tennessee, New Mexico has always felt like my home.
yeah.
So,
We're going to talk about Mexico. That's one of the names. But what I like to talk about first is you're a Renaissance writer when it comes to speculative fiction. You write a little bit of everything. Like horror, science fiction, fantasy, and stuff like that. But recently, we came out with the Cyberpunk anthology. But what I want to tell, like, what everybody knows, is that you were Cyberpunk way before everybody else. I mean, you were out here, doing your thing in Cyberpunk a long time ago. Let me, where's this? Um, Probably Nicole's best friend, Sybil Lewis. And this is one of the books here. And actually, we have a Sybil Lewis story in the Cyberpunk anthology. So, where does this love from Cyberpunk come from? And give us a little bit of background on Sybil Lewis's world as well.
I'm a big fan of Philip K. Dick. I think I'm reading Philip K. Dick by happenstance. I read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which ended up becoming Blade Runner, which was and my dad was a big fan of Blade Runners. We watched it multiple times, and so. But I'm also a fan of mysteries, and so I was also at the same time devouring Robert B. Parker's Spencer for Hire series.
Okay, yeah.
And so you know that Spencer has Hawk
Yeah.
occasionally, and they are an unlikely duo. There's lots of give and take with their relationship, and so I wanted to have. And at the time I started writing Sybil, there were a lot of Black girlfriend books because Terry McMillan's Waiting to Exhale had come out, and there's a lot of contemporary Black women girlfriend books that were being published then. But I wanted to show a positive relationship between Black women, but I wanted it to be very much like Spencer and Hawk, right? But I
Okay.
wanted them to be women.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I wanted it to be, because I don't write contemporary very well, I also wanted it to be Sybil takes place in it. And I like cyberpunk a lot because it's high tech, it's low life, it's lots of gloominess. I'm melancholy by nature, but I like watching people persevere in really adverse situations because that's pretty much my life. It's pretty much people that I grew up with. We're all very poor. I grew up in a housing project. I mean, my parents were teenagers when I was born. Like my dad was a junior in high school. And so just watching people persevere in these really challenging situations, I wanted to tell stories like that because I find them inspiring and I hope they inspire others. But I also want to see more people like me in spec. So there's a lot of reasons why Sybil, came to be, but most of her roots are in that mystery genre because she's a detective, but also the relationship between her and Jane is really important. And the fact that I really like Philip K. Dick a lot because he asks really complex questions about life, about technology and how we interact with it, about relationship. What does it mean to be human? Dude, I could go all day about this.
Well, it's interesting you talk about that because I do like the relationship between Sybil and Jane, and Jane's very no nonsense. They both have their secrets, and it influences the relationship between them and the storylines. It's one question I want to ask you because I hear this a lot when you talk to science fiction, especially Black science fiction writers and people who are fans. And there's always this statement made about, certain people didn't see us in the future and all this kind of stuff like that. And personally, I'm one of those people, I have a certain opinion about that. But, the fact that you were writing Cyberpunk means that wasn't something that was an obstacle to you because you were seeing us in the future and you were creating us in the future. So how do you feel about that particular statement,
I mean, where would we go? I mean, we're the Africans are the beginning of mankind, of modern man, right? Africa is the birthplace of humanity. Why would we not be in the future? Like, it didn't even occur to me that wouldn't be the case. But you got to remember, I grew up watching Star Trek too, so I saw your horror on the Enterprise. I saw other Black men and women aboard the Enterprise. So for me, in my childhood, being shaped by that and being shaped by the fact that we're everywhere now, where we go? Of course, we're going to be in the future. The future is 20 years from now. The future is 30 years from now, and we're still here. So it never occurred to me that we wouldn't be in the future. It just didn't.
Yeah,
I didn't see it reflected, but it didn't occur to me that wouldn't be the case.
Exactly. Not only would we be in the future, we would be an active part of it.
Yeah.
And that's what you're showing in your books as well. Now, I'm gonna move to my second topic, which is the one that I really want to talk about. I really like to talk about, and it's your book, Sisters of the Wild Sage.
My weird Western anthology. Yeah.
I was enthralled by that just when I saw the cover art, and I was like, man, I've got to get this book. I've got to read this book.
Yeah.
And when I read it, the thing that there's always characters and stories, and you like the characters, you can get into the characters. But the thing about this book is that New Mexico is a character.
Yes.
In this book.
Yes.
And you see and you feel New Mexico in every story that you read. You can't read any of these stories without knowing that you're very well grounded in this environment. And so
Right.
my question is, why is that?
Oh man. So New Mexico is their nickname is, and you'll see it on their license plates, is the land of enchantment. And this is absolutely true. For an East Tennessee Southern girl who grew up in the mountains, right? I grew up in Knoxville, at the foothills of the mountains. The sea is everything's rolling hills, everything is green. To go west to New Mexico, where there are more sheep than people, to this very flat, desolate looking place, but it's so vibrant with life. Even though it doesn't look like it on the outskirts, you go, oh my God, it's all dusty and brown. It's also beautiful, and that life perseveres there. It's just a gorgeous place. And it doesn't matter where you go in the state, whether you're in the high desert in the Four Corners, like in Gallup, where I was,
Mhm.
or whether you go down to Las Cruces, which is the city of crosses, but it's hot, but it's also, it has like Phoenix-like desert weather, or if you're in Albuquerque, which has a mix, or in Santa Fe, which has mountains, it is it's so different than any other place you'll go in the States. And I used to travel for a living in my other life. And I've been to 43 of the 50 states. And let me just tell you, there is no place like the Southwest. There just isn't. And it's so just an engaging, wonderful place for your imagination too. There are large stretches of land when you're going down the highway on I-40. You're like, man, this is a perfect place for a body, and nobody would ever find it because it's just stretches and stretches of land.
Wow, okay.
But I also was enchanted by the people there. So I lived in the Four Corners area. And so the Four Corners area is surrounded on three sides by Native American tribes, the Zuni, the Hopi, and the Navajo, the Dene. And so in those areas, in my interactions, my students were all Dene or Hopi, or Zuni in many cases, predominantly Zuni and Navajo. But just learning about all these different cultures, these different belief systems, it's just truly a magnificent place. Different foods. I miss it tremendously.
I felt that way when I visited Phoenix, because when I first went there, I was like, man, everything's brown. But it took me a while to get there to acclimate and start to see the differences and the nuances and different things like that. I mean, after I read this book, I was like, man, I gotta go to Mexico. So like, we gotta visit there, man, because it's
So gorgeous. There's so many different tribes in the state, and there's so many different, it's really interesting to see how different tribes adapted to the climates to which they were relocated to. Because other than the Navajo and not the Navajo or the Dene, most of the tribes that are in New Mexico were relocated there to reservations from other places. So it's really great to just hear different languages and experience so many different things, but it's such a giving state. I mean, people say that when you come to New Mexico and if you live there, you will eventually leave, but you don't want to. You'll always want to come back. And every single friend I had that had left to go to bigger jobs, bigger whatever, they miss that state and they go back to visit regularly. Because it's like one of those intoxicated, you are enchanted. And when you miss that magic when you go someplace else, and then you want to go back and be re-enchanted again.
well, the book. One thing about the books, that's another question I have. You cover not only, you have a range of different characters, but you also do it in a range of different time frames, the past and the present and the future. Is that was that something that you had planned when you came to the book, or was it something that just kind of evolved as you started to tell these stories? You know?
So all the stories except for the title story, which is Sisters of the Wild Sage, all the stories except for that one um, were written over the course of like 10 years.
Ah, okay.
And so they are from a variety of different places in my own writing career.
Mm-hmm.
And so Weird Westerns tend to be set in the American West
Yeah.
before, right, it became before they so in most of them take place in the New Mexico territory before it became a state.
Mm-hmm.
However, I am of the opinion that weird westerns can take place in the future, and you see that in Cowboy Bebop, you see that in Firefly, where you see these very Star Trek was pitched as Wagon Train to the Stars, and so for me, it's not just the past; it's also the present, and can be the future as well, in terms of. And it's very similar to our vampire story that you wrote, Milton. It's not confined by being in, Victorian London. This story can take place and be applicable in other settings. And so there are some of my weird westerns that take place in the future for that reason. Was it planned? No. It's just how it happened.
But I really like the feel of the stories, and again, the way that the landscape kind of linked all the stories together. And as soon as I finished the book, I was like, man, this could be a Netflix series. I could see, kind of like what the Coen Brothers series that they did, the Western series they did. I mean, this kind of reminded me of that. Even though that your particular stories range to time frames, I got that same feel, and that same where the landscape and just the environment just tied everything together. And
yes,
if I was to put a list of books together that I would love to see visualized, this would definitely be one of them. And it would be not only because of the characters, but again because of that landscape. So
shot on location in New Mexico.
There you go.
Right.
That would be great. And I'm going to stop gushing about that because I got one more area I want to talk about. I want to go to the land of the birds right now. That's how I want to go. I want to talk about the kingdom of avis, which for me is, and this is one of the things I say is in the indie realm, I've come across some of the most imaginative world building because of the fact that people aren't, trying to work toward a certain requirement or a certain set of restrictions and stuff like that. And when I read the first book, Kill Three Birds, I mean, again, you have some amazing cover art. So I knew right then and there when I saw it, so I'm reading this book. That's going to happen, And when I started getting into the story, I was just like blown away. I'm like, man, how do you, it's just the work that you did and how you incorporated all this into it. So I guess the best way to start to talk about this is for you to kind of give us a background of this world and give us some of the mechanics and how it, what the kingdom of avis is all about. Because I have some questions about that. While you talk about this, you'll answer some of those.
Okay. So the kingdom of avis grew out of my desire to write a fantasy story. I wanted a fantasy world, but I didn't want elves and dwarves. I wanted something different. And so as I was sitting trying to decide what I wanted to write about, I went through the list like, okay, maybe I could do, can't do vampires, can't do werewolves because they're already done like to death. And then I'm like, can't do bears or foxes, deer. And so I kept going down the list because urban fantasy kind of has like a claim on all these other creatures. So I was like, there's no fantasy about birds. I like birds. I do bird watch. And so the kingdom of avis is the kingdom of birds. And so everyone in avis is in a bird clan and they're governed by an organization that is kind of like the Vatican, where you have you have a pope, you have a bishop, you have cardinals. They're actually birds. So the pope is an owl. The bishops are or the cardinals are cardinals, the priests are doves, right? And so I wanted them to, they also are matrilineal. So they all worship, the women have the power in this kingdom, which is the case in most birds. If you think about the bird kingdom, when birds are trying to find a mate, it's usually the male that's really attractive and colorful because he's trying to attract a female mate. Yep. And if she doesn't like him, his whole world is over. And so so of course, their religion is a big part of the government. So there's no separate state in religion. It's one thing. And so for those birds that don't practice, don't follow the goddess, they are. So in avis, there are nests, which are kind of like states or provinces, and eggs are cities or towns. And so if you live in an egg, right, you can live in the egg if you follow the goddess. If you don't follow the goddess, you live in what's called the outer shell, which is kind of like the poor area, right? And it's not, you're kind of not in the in with the good birds. And so there are only 5 birds that are a part of the order. And my protagonist, Prentice, is part of the investigative arm, right? She's a hawk, and hawks investigate. They can see the unseen. Every egg has a policing force. They're the eagles. If you think about eagles, especially the way Americans think about eagles, they're super macho. They know everything, right? They're the they're the body mass, right? They're the force that takes care of the egg. Um, but in the case when eagles can't find what's going on, or it involves magic or some supernatural occurrence, they could call the order and ask for an assistance, kind of like the BAU for the FBI. If I'm a local police district and I need help from the feds, I got to call in and request. They can't just come in. The FBI can't just come in unless you ask, or unless it violates, one of the federal laws. So Prentice gets asked, especially in Kill Three Birds, to come and, excuse me, I could have sworn I turned my phone off. Prentice is asked to come and investigate a crime, and that's what she does. She has this ability to see the unseen, and it's innate in all hawks. So she gets it from her mother, and she can engage her hawk-like vision, which allows her to see supernatural activity that has occurred in the past and what type of magic has been used. The problem with this is that if she uses it a lot, she'll eventually go blind. It becomes harder and harder to return to her human eyes. And like her mother, she'll go blind. And then she'll be retired from the order.
Yeah, I thought that was really sad. I read, I'm like, so eventually we're looking at this character that will eventually become blind. And I don't want to talk too much about it because I want people to read this book. But the fact that she is so dedicated to what she's doing, that she continues to use this ability, knowing that eventually it's going to lead to this.
Yes.
I mean,
you can't do magic without consequences. And so, and I didn't want her to have this Superman-like ability where nothing affects her. She has no conflict because she's all powerful. I did not want that. And I also did, but I also made it because it's a murder mystery, right? Yeah. She has to find a way and decide, is this a good opportunity to use it or not? Yeah. Because you can't just be freewheeling it, because the more she uses it, right? Yeah. So she has to be very strategic about that.
Yeah, see, personally, I'd be the laziest hawk in the world. Don't get Milton, he's not gonna see anything.
Milton be like, look, I saw it, I'm done, I'm out.
Exactly.
So that's the kingdom of Avis. So one of the questions I always get is, are they people or are they birds? Well, the Phoenix, who is the goddess, decided who would be able to retain their wings. And that's those 5 birds that are in the order. Everyone else is wingless. And they're humans, but they have wings. But for every other bird, they don't have wings except for those 5.
See, that answers a question too that I had about the book. So that's, again, I mean, when you sit and listen to this world, the world building that you put into it, and that you created a really unique world. The first book was great. Theft Most Foul is great. So I'm gonna ask for everybody else. So when do we get the 3rd book of the series? A matter of fact, when do we get the 10th book of this series?
So I just finished writing a world building course for fantasy for Speculative Fiction Academy. If you are a budding writer, you should definitely sign up for that. For Speculative Fiction Academy, they have all kinds of really amazing genre-related writing courses, which you don't always get in some of the other places that have online writing courses. I have a weird writing course up there too. So if you're interested in writing weird Westerns, or if you're interested in world building for fantasy, I have courses over there. So I'll be back, now that that's over, I can go back to the Kingdom of Avis. I know what I want to do with the next series. So each book is a little different. Like Kill Three Birds is my serial killer book, right? And Theft Most Foul is my attempt at Dan Brown, right? There's an artifact from a museum that gets stolen. So that's my attempt at being Dan Brown, right? So the 3rd one is going to be Prentice goes back. She gets called back to Lanham, which is the home of the order. And you get to see more about how the order works and functions. and she will eventually go home. So to her home, her birth home in Tucson. And so you'll get to see a lot more of her personal life, because we've only seen her in her professional functions, right?
Mhm.
But you'll get to see a little bit more of her personal life, and the story gets a little bit more complicated when she goes home.
Wow.
But that's coming up.
Okay, I'm definitely looking forward for that, to that. So we've talked about, Nicole, the author, but I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about Nicole, the publisher, and Mocha Memoirs, because um, you're providing a service to what we do. You're providing opportunity for other authors to be able to, share their stories, which especially back in the day when we were all, getting our footing and our grounding, it was really important, because that was the reason that we started to do it as individuals, but we also started to do it for other people because
Yep.
we wanted to be able to share that opportunity. So tell us about Mocha Memoirs and how it came to be.
Okay, so Mocha Memoirs is my small press, and our mission has consistently been since day one is to amplify marginalized voices in speculative fiction. Back when I started, and Milton was just hinted at this, it was what, 2001?
Back in the day.
Back in the day where, gatekeeping was really strong in terms of allowing marginalized voices, Black voices in particular, to be published in speculative fiction. There's no market. There could be only one type of thinking. We have Octavia Butler. We don't need anybody else. And so that kind of limited thinking was a hindrance to me as an author. And I'm like, I can't be the only one, right? And so I had taken some time off from writing science fiction and fantasy, and I wrote erotic romance for like 6 years under a different pen name. And it was really successful. But it allowed me to work with a lot of small presses. And from those 6 years, I met authors, I met editors, I met cover artists. I found out how small presses worked. And then I was like, I can do this. And I wanted to do it not just for myself, but I knew that there were other people who didn't have that experience and who was still coming up against that closed gate. And I wanted to provide an opportunity for them to be able to see their works in print and tell their unique stories that just weren't being heard.
And you've done a great job at that. I mean, most recently with the Slay anthology. It's, from what I'm hearing and what I've read, it's a great book,
Yeah.
different perspectives on the whole vampire mythology.
Yep.
Some of them classic, some of them different. It's been recognized by a number of say some of the important people in the industry have
Yes.
talked about it and said good things about it. And if you don't have a copy of it, please get it now.
Yeah, fix that.
Matter of fact, just look at Nicole Given Kurtz and just get everything that she has. This is great. I love it. You and I, we could talk forever.
Yeah.
But what I'd like to do is give you an opportunity to tell everybody where they can find your work. And matter of fact, before I do that, what can we expect from you and Mocha Memoirs down the road? What do you got? What do you got coming for us?
So again, the third book for the Kingdom of Avis series will be out this year. I'm edging for August. We'll see. Especially get a snowstorm this weekend, I definitely will be writing. We're looking at August for that. In terms of Mocha, we're looking at Lisa L. Marie Wood's novella, another one from her, and it will include like her award-winning screenplay for Black Hole, which is really awesome. So the front part's a novella, the back part is the screenplay. You'll get that. That's coming out. Sumiko has Happiness and Other Diseases. That's coming out in March. So if you're gender fluid, right, or binary, this is a great series for you. Even if you're not, it's just a really good, fun story about gods and goddesses and things like that. So I love it. So that's coming out in March. What else is coming out? We'll have a Weird Western from one of our authors as well. That's coming out in February. February is Black History Month, but it's also tends to be Women in Horror Month. And so that's a month where we're always top heavy in horror for some reason. Don't know why that is. Because I'm a horror fan. But so that's our big month. So we'll definitely have like a sale and things like that. So definitely check us out in February and March as we celebrate Women in Horror Month and Women History Month, which is March.
So we've written all this down. So where do we find all this?
At mochamemoirspress.com.
Okay, and we will have the link. The link is in the comments, so you can pull it up and take a look at it. So hey, thank you, Nicole, for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for sharing this information with us. We'll jump on it, and I'm ready to get my books and get them in my stack so I can start reading sales. But
Sweet.
again, everybody, thank you guys for checking out the video. Thank you for checking out 11 Questions Special Edition, and enjoy the rest of your day. Y'all take care.
Thank you.
Peace.